serious. People who found a secret room or space in their house. How long did you live in the house before you found it, and what was in it? What was the eventual outcome of finding the room? Story 1. A couple of years ago, I rented an apartment that was in a massive old architecture style building. No idea how old it was. I remember when I did the showing, they showed me a door that had an elaborate staircase that went straight up to the ceiling, and explained that it went to the attic, which was sealed up. When I was finally moving out, curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed on the panel at the top of the stairs until it popped open and hoisted myself up there. It was completely dark, and the floor was covered in at least an inch of dust, and I found that it was an entire extra floor to my unit. There was some old rotting furniture and magazines littered throughout the rooms. I eventually found a small hole in one of the walls that went into the sealed off upstairs of the unit next to mine, and decided to go through that one too. I found a smaller hole at the back end of that area that led to the next one. I eventually made my way through about 5 or 6 of these sealed off spaces that had no entrances. The farther I went in, the older the furniture I found. Fridges from the 50s or earlier, old dishware, and so much dust over everything. The last unit was the most interesting. Hand-painted scenes on the walls and holes to the attic letting sunlight stream in. I took small videos, but they're all on Snapchat. I must have been up there for hours just exploring alone in the dark. I was pretty lucky to have the only room with the access up there. Story 2. My old house had this weirdly large concrete slab in the corner of the yard that was covered by a ton of leaves when we moved in. I thought it was maybe foundation for a shed, but it was in a very odd location. Years later, when I was getting ready to move, it bugged me that I didn't know what it was for. I got a friend to help me come dig around it, expecting to confirm that it was just an old foundation. We dug for days in the middle of August. We had to start digging at night to protect ourselves from the heat. We got about 15 feet down, and the concrete wasn't showing any signs of ending. We eventually struck a pipe with a nozzle and discovered that there was more concrete moving towards the center of the yard. About a week later, my dad came home and almost had a stroke when he saw that we were digging up half the yard. We'd sold the house and were expected to leave by September 1st. He made us fill it all in, and I left home never finding out what it was. Some of my teachers who were longtime town residents told me that my neighborhood had been farmland before development, and that there may have been several bomb or fallout shelters in that area. I would have loved to have found an entrance into the bunker if that's what it was. Story 3. Back in college, some friends and I rented an old mansion that had been built in the early 1920s from an elderly lady. The place was falling apart, but it was huge and rent was dirt cheap. About 2 years into living there, I went to the basement to do some laundry and momentarily lost my balance, reaching out to steady myself using one of the wall panels. It flexed more than I expected, and after some inspection I found that it was removable. Behind it was a small, mostly empty, very dirty, concrete room about 100 square feet. I say mostly empty because right in the middle there was a hole the size of a well that had been previously bricked up. It must have been old because the bricks had eroded at some point and exposed some of the hole, maybe a 2 feet diameter circle out of the full 5 feet. After calling my friends down to look at it, I got the courage to creep a little closer and peer down into it. There was another room roughly the same size but deep, maybe 15 feet down, and mostly dirt. We shined a flashlight down into it and I could swear there was a teddy bear at the bottom. Unfortunately, despite plenty bargaining, none of us were ever able to work up the courage, liquid or regular, to tie a rope and climb down for a closer look, especially after we noticed that the bricks which I thought had fallen in were all accounted for, scattered around the hole as if something had broken out. At the risk of my account being discovered by my Redditor friends, this was in Pittsburgh. We did a little research and think the sub-basement may have been related to Prohibition, but honestly, I'm just willing to accept that explanation in order to avoid lifelong nightmares. Story 4. My grandma's house is about 244 years old. I think I was about 12 before I realized that there was an extra window between the kitchen and what was at the time the living room, but has since resumed service as the dining room. Logically, it didn't make sense. I knew there was a butler's pantry between those two rooms, but I knew there was no window in it. I went climbing through the huge old bushes almost over the window, and eventually found an overgrown door. It was like that part in The Secret Garden where Mary finds the door in the ivy. It was an opening, and I was too little to look in the window. Unlike in the book, a little bird never showed me where the key was buried, unfortunately. I kind of forgot about it, figured it was just as forbidden as the third floor/attic, which I was fine with because the attic was where the Shadow Man lived. That's a whole another story. Until a few years back, when my aunt uploaded an album to Facebook. It was part 286, I'm exaggerating, of a now abandoned project to renovate the old family homestead. The workers had cleared the jungle that was the back of the house and gotten the door off of the hinges. It was actually nothing, just a little extra storage space that had been cleaned out decades ago. But she also posted some story. The house used to have an annex, dates unknown, making it into a T. There are absolutely no known pictures of the annex, which hurts. My aunt, who has a familial interest in history, said she thought the window must have been original to the house, and that the shed was basically empty space left over after the annex was eventually demolished. Story 5. Bought a very rugged cabin with acreage a few years back. Cabin was built in the 70s. A friend of mine discovered a large attic, which was surprising. There was no easy way into the attic. I knew there was space, but it did not appear to be as big as it was. Inside the attic was evidence someone was living in there at one point, including a bloodied mattress. There were no lights, no comfort, just a sheet blocking off the part of the attic that didn't have some semblance of a floor, and a bloody mattress. This was all above my room. I got hella weird vibes in that house after that, and an earthquake ended up taking out the cabin shortly after. I tore it apart, salvaged a bunch of wood, and rebuilt a new cabin without the creepy vibes. The most unnerving part about the cabin was the previous owner. Upon finding news I'd bought the land, came back just before I got the keys from the realtor and left a note that simply read, "Good luck in the center of the living area. Just recently found a massive old tree on the land that had been previously scorched by fire decades ago and survived." If that land could talk, I'm sure it would have stories. Story 6. It was about a year into owning our house. We actually found 2 secret rooms. One was just a room under the stairs that was closed off. Had some toys from the 70s in it. The really crazy one was when we redid the insulation in our attic. One of the workers asked if I knew there was a room up there. I had no idea. So we cut open the drywall, and there were stacks on stacks of boxes from the 60s. Like a ton of boxes. And they were all full. So I opened them up expecting some cool stuff. And they were full of freaking pine cones. One of the bigger bummers in my life. Story 7. Moved into an 18th century farmhouse as a little kid and found a small panel door in the back of the large closet in my small room. Turned out to be a small finished room over the eaves that had a small portal window. I spent hours in that room, reading and hiding from the world. Story 8. When clearing out my grandma's house, I found a small door in the wall of the basement that led to a tiny room. According to my mother, that's where they hid the family heirlooms when thieving relatives came to town. I was mostly interested in the fact that it was covered in scribbles from my mom and her sisters growing up. Story 9. In my house, there was an upstairs bedroom that was made into a game room for me and my sister. When we were about 12 years old, we realized that a section of the paneling came off, and there was a small closet-sized room behind it. We kept it a secret so that when friends came over, we would have the ultimate hiding spot for hide and seek. A few years later, we were talking to our parents about what we found, and they said that the house was built during the Prohibition era, so they most likely used it as a place to hide alcohol. Story 10. I went to visit my grandparents a few months after they'd moved into a new house out in the country. I got into a bit of horseplay with a cousin and got shoved into a wall. It broke a big hole and we realized there was a large empty space back there. With Grandpa's help, we tore the wall down and found a little room full of planting trays and grow lamps. There were a number of books about horticulture and one specifically about growing marijuana. There was no secret way in as far as we could tell. Someone had just weighted the entire room off for some reason. Story 11. We bought a house that had been built in the 1880s. Lived in it for 7 years and then had to have some wiring work done. The electrician was working down in the basement and wanted to drill through a brick wall to the outside for some reason. We give him the okay and he goes about his business. He starts drilling and then stops, comes upstairs and tells us that he just found a bricked up room and what do we want to do about it. Well, we kind of still want our wiring situation taken care of, but if there was a body or something in there, I definitely want to know. On the other hand, I don't want to let my sister's boyfriend knock the wall down with a sledgehammer. As we were discussing this, the electrician offers to run a scope through the hole he just drilled so we can take a look without doing more damage. Or as he put it, destroying evidence. So our new friend gets his scope set up and we all go down to the basement and watch the monitor. It's a very small space, maybe 3 by 5 feet. Nothing in there but a really old, gross-looking plushie. Not a teddy bear, maybe a dog. It was sewed out of some kind of patterned fabric in a vaguely dog-like shape. That's it, nothing else. Electrician asks us what we want to do. I ask if he can seal the hole he just drilled because this is definitely how ghost movies start. He agreed and patched it up, drilled somewhere else, finished the rewiring, and we all continued our lives. We moved out 2 years later and as far as I know, Haunted Doggy is still bricked up in the basement of the house. Story 13. While installing Cat5e network cables many years ago in my house, I discovered a short and squat cast iron water heater inside some walls, around a staircase and bathroom, connecting the basement and the next level of the house. I'm guessing whoever did the remodel didn't think the little bit of space that could be reclaimed was worth it. I found it when I realized my measurements weren't making sense and couldn't figure out why I wasn't seeing my Ethernet cable. I had to plot everything out carefully because of the split level nature of my house, the crawl space, the basement, etc., and figured out there was 3 feet of space unaccounted for. It will probably be removed when we remodel the basement bathroom. I figure I can either get more storage space or a full bathtub instead of just the shower stall that is in there now. Story 14. We moved into a house with a door in the kitchen that could not be opened. The real estate tried but failed, assumed it led to the laundry room but was walled off. My older siblings, like any typical teenagers, were not convinced of this and were determined to open it. It was just a normal pantry, but they never told our mother they managed to open it and used it to hide things from her like alcohol, smokes, and weed. Story 14. My parents bought a house from an old family member to help her pay for nursing home care. She hadn't lived in the house for years at that point. She was a hoarder and we were tasked with cleaning up the house the course of a summer in order to make it livable prior to the start of school. Rat carcasses fused to the carpet, old tax documents from the 60s, etc. We were scraping up the linoleum tiling covering the original hardwood floor, disappointingly enough, in a side room when I made the joke about the previous resident being a secret mass murderer and that there was a trapdoor under the linoleum full of dead bodies. I pulled up a huge section of tiling, only to find a trapdoor underneath. Scared the crap out of me, but when we finally built up enough courage to open the damn thing, we discovered there was nothing under there. It was a walled off section of the basement with a dirt floor. We suspect it was an old root cellar from back when farmers had to store their crap in a cold, dark place to prevent it from spoiling. Story 15. It was secret from me but not my parents. You know how some houses have beds in drawers? We had a drawer like that but didn't use it, and the empty drawer could also be accessed through a hole in the adjacent closet. I think I found it around age 8, so about 6 years after moving in, when playing hide and seek and crawling deeper into that closet than I ever had previously. I spent a lot of time in there after that as my secret clubhouse. Eventually, the whole room was remodeled and that drawer, as well as a second staircase, were removed. Apparently, that room used to be a servant's quarters when it was first built, which explains the stairs from a bedroom to the kitchen, and maybe someone with only one room to themselves would want the space saving of a drawer bed. But my parents had no use for it because we didn't have a live-in servant. Story 16. I found a secret space in my closet when my mom and I were moving out of the house she was renting to move into my stepdad's house. I never noticed it because junk covered the section of the wall that was covering a small entrance to a room that was sealed off with boards and plywood. I couldn't pry it open, but I could see light shining in it and a single mason jar filled with what I assumed was water. The air was cold in there, like as if the central heating didn't even reach that part. I showed it to my mom and she told me that she doesn't remember seeing that there when we had moved in 8 years prior, but since we were moving out, it didn't matter. The room gave me the creeps for whatever reason. I know why it was sealed off or why there was a single mason jar filled with water in the center of the room. Story 17. A friend of mine rented a holiday villa in Mexico years ago. They stayed there for 3 weeks. It had been advertised as 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, so they were kind of pissed off to find that there were only 2 bathrooms, and the 4th bedroom was kind of small. The day before they were leaving, they did a little bit of cleanup. One of my friends went to put the broom into the closet beside the fridge. He opened the closet door only to find that it led to a massive room with a bathroom and its own balcony. The first night that they'd gotten there, one of them had tried the door and thought it was locked and assumed that was maybe where they stored cleaning stuff or extra linen. After that, no one thought to try the door again until it was accidentally opened the day before leaving. Story 18. Not my house, but a nearby. There was a house that was abandoned for several years. It was built in North Texas during the 1920s and belonged to a local businessman. Some friends and I participated in some creative entry of the house during the 80s. There were a couple of hidden closets. The columns of the front porch were big enough and hollow so lookouts could hide in there. If you went down the kitchen stairs to the basement/wine cellar, everything looked normal till you turned around to go back up the stairs. If you looked carefully, there were hidden handles under the step edges. A section of the stairs could swing up and there was an escape tunnel. Story 20. I used to do evictions and clean houses before they were put back on the market. Well, this $2 million house was abandoned because nobody could afford it, and some teens decided to throw a rager in it. My job was to clean the whole house. They have this huge office with beautiful wooden bookcases around the whole room. As I'm cleaning the alcohol off of them, I noticed one of them had a crack between the others, so I tug on it, and sure enough, it opens up with a hidden door behind it. I was so excited that I found a secret room, and was pumped to open the door. When I did, it was a bathroom. Who uses a secret door for a shitter? These were definitely interesting stories, but thank you so much for watching. But if you have stories of your own, feel free to write them below in the comments so I can make a video on them in the future. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you liked it. I'll see you in the next one.